Within 24 hours of the Jacobites' departure, the bells of Manchester rang to the streets, alerting the people that the pursuing government's army had arrived, with the butcher. On the 29th of November 1745, the bonny Prince Charlie Stuart rode into Manchester. Bells were ringing and everyone placed a candle in their window, illuminating all the houses that evening. Little Elizabeth stood there holding her father's hand and Mr. John Byrom, and little Elizabeth, often known as Betty, loved the excitement, clinging to her dad and jumping up and down. And as soon as she went inside, she wrote down everything she saw in her diary, detailing everything that would happen in the coming weeks. And on the 1st of December, the bonny prince and his newly raised Manchester regiment, a Jacobite unit, that despite promises from other English towns and cities, Manchester was the only significant number of English recruits willing to fight for Charles Edward Stuart in his attempt to regain the British throne for his father. The Jacobites never made the march to London. Reaching Derby, they decided to turn back and unfortunately march to their fate on Culloden Moor. Most of the Manchester regiment, which at this point consisted not just of men recruited in Manchester, but of other English men loyal to the Jacobite cause, split, with some staying in Manchester and some remaining in Carlisle Castle rather than continuing to Scotland. But some English recruits carried on with the rest of the Jacobite army, thinking that they would soon march back into England to take the throne. However, when the Duke of Cumberland and his forces reached Manchester, and then later Carlisle Castle, the butcher lived up to his name. He laid siege to Manchester, and within 8 days the Duke took the town, and then took the prisoners with him to Carlisle, where once he had taken the castle, put the prisoners on trial, with quote, singling out the officers of the Manchester regiment, who were treated with disproportionate severity. More men from this regiment were convicted and executed than from any other Jacobite regiment in the army, and of all those executed, a quarter of them were from the Manchester regiment. It seemed that the British authorities wanted to send out a strong warning to the English Jacobites not to join in any further attempts by the Stuarts to regain their crown with anyone who housed, fed, or aided the Jacobite troops were put on trial for treason. Thomas Deacon and Thomas Siddall had spent their time in St Anne's Square recruiting troops for the Jacobite Manchester regiment. Unfortunately, when the Duke of Cumberland came to Manchester, the two men were arrested and taken with other prisoners to Carlisle Castle, where they were hung, drawn and quartered. Their heads were brought back to Manchester and put on pikes on the building where the Royal Exchange stands today. It's said while the heads were up there, warning the rest of Manchester to behave, Dr. William Deacon would walk past his son's head, Thomas Deacon, every morning and would raise his hat and greet him, until one day the heads were stolen by a Jacobite supporter. They were later retrieved and are now buried outside St Anne's Church. Not all the Jacobites made the trip to Carlisle. A few never made it out of Manchester, with many being murdered where they were found, leading to some unexplained happenings going on today. Shadows of kilted soldiers have been seen in the basements of Manchester pubs. On the site which is now offices on Peter Street, there have been repeated reports of the sound of bagpipes, loud but gently playing a lament, and when people track the sound to the office and the ones around it, they are always empty. But possibly the worst story of hauntings from the failed uprising is that of the Rovers Return Trinket Shop, a building that is dated to 1306 and became a pub in the 1700s that housed some of the Highland Jacobites when they stayed in Manchester. And there have been many reports of the same story repeatedly happening to many people over the years. Mr. Brown and his wife made their way upstairs and got ready for bed. Floorboards creaked and groaned, but that was normal for a house that was nearly 550 years old. The couple went to sleep, but a few hours later, the room was cold. Mr. Brown pulled his covers up high around his neck, trying to keep warm. But as he did, he felt uneasy, like someone else was in the room. He listened carefully, now wide awake. He heard nothing, but still couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was with him. He sat up in bed. He looked down at his wife. She was still fast asleep but restless. He looked into the darkness. He looked into the darkness of the room, and there, in the gloom, walking towards the foot of the bed, was a former Jacobite soldier, with his dirk held tightly in his right hand, his face screwed up in pain and anguish. Mr. Brown couldn't move. He couldn't make a sound as the Highlander walked closer and closer, knife outstretched, until he came to the foot of the bed and vanished. The Jacobite has performed this unsettling display countless times and has been witnessed standing in the pub, staring at a portrait of Bonnie Prince Charlie. Sadly, the building has been bulldozed in the 1960s by Manchester City Council wanting to modernise the area. But the building stood where the Superdry store is now, part of the Manchester Arndale, and apparently strange things are still happening in the store. This week was not the story of the 1745 Jacobite uprising. I want to tell that story later, as it is a large, complicated part of the British history, and I want to do it justice. So look out for that episode, as I aim to do it soon. Manchester has close ties with Scotland, Ireland and Italy, to name but a few, as it's been such a cultural melting pot over the ages. That'll be it for today. If you enjoyed that, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe to receive my weekly content uploaded every Wednesday. Thanks for watching. Take care.